Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the CyberGen Compliance Talks podcast, the podcast where we talk with leaders from across the technology and compliance space with the idea of trying to change the narrative around compliance from that being compliance as a business bottleneck to that being a strategic business enabler. Today, I'm joined by Shaun Cooney, the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Promon. Shaun, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Good to be here.
Well, I'm excited to kind of get stuck into this episode. I think there's a lot we're going to cover. But Shaun, for the listeners who don't already know who you are, could you begin by giving me a bit of an introduction to yourself and a bit about your professional background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Shaun Cooney. I've been the CPTO at Promon for just over a year now, and it's flown by. It really has. But that's a stepping stone for me. That was never really where I was intending on going. My background actually was in the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, helping to establish that and build some engineering teams in that space. And then I moved to Splunk and then Cisco, dealing with big data and helping customers from a consultancy perspective. And then more recently have moved into this role. So what I've tried to do over my career is kind of spread myself from, a technologist, understanding the technology, leadership, running the teams, and then the commercial angle, and then more recently bringing them together in a CPTO role.
And before we dive into a little bit more about kind of what Promon does specifically, I want to kind of delve into that a little bit more because I think it's such an interesting journey you've been on kind of professionally, going from, I think for a lot of kind of technical people, staying in the technical world is the status quo. That's what a lot of people do. Yet you seem to have that sort of understanding, that understanding the commercial side of things was vitally important to add that kind of string to your bow, as it were. So talk through, that kind of thinking and maybe some of the struggles and challenges you had from going from a purely tech-based role to more of a customer-facing commercial role.
Yeah, I've struggled personally with this and trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, right? And for a long time, I said I want to be close to the code, close to the problem, trying to tackle the problem myself. But what I realized over time is that my strength is not necessarily writing code or installing infrastructure or whatever it may be. My strength is actually helping other people put them in a better place so that they can do that. That's how I scale my impact. So when I realized that, and that took me many, many, many years to get to that stage, but when I realized that, that kind of accelerated my journey to be a leader of technologists more than anything else, which is even more important these days when we talk about AI, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And then COVID happened, actually. COVID was a big driver for me in a positive way in this sense. I realized that I knew the organization that I worked for very well. I knew it inside out. I knew exactly how to work within government. But if I wanted to step outside of that to do something that I didn't know yet what I wanted to do, I was missing something. And it was a commercial world. I didn't know how to really engage with clients and customers or even use that terminology of, go to market and all of that stuff that we're familiar with now. That was all new to me. And I was very lucky that I had a number of contacts with inside lots of vendor organizations. So I could have those conversations and realize what I didn't know. And that gave me that self-awareness, and that gave me the inspiration to go and leave and try something different. I've always said to myself that the thing for me that drives me is learning. And once I get good at something, I need to find another opportunity to go and find something that I can go and learn. And I've always said that the best thing for me personally is to find an opportunity where the thing that I need to learn helps me in the direction that I want to be. And I always knew that I wanted to be in an organization like Promon. I didn't expect it to be Promon, didn't know of Promon before. But I always knew it wanted to be a leadership role with a kind of a cross-functional leadership position where you can't just be a technologist. I am a technologist. I still consider myself a technologist. That's important to me. It makes me credible in what I do, who I am. But I needed to find the opportunity to do something different to bridge that gap.
Well, I think your background and that kind of transition you made is such a good kind of case study for the kind of broader need of the deep tech, but specifically cybersecurity sector, where quite a lot of, the cybersecurity business I've worked with in the past, there's such a disconnect, it seems, between the marketing, the sales and the product team, where it's marketing says one thing, sales says something entirely different. And then it's, falls on the kind of the engineers when they can't sort of deliver on these promises. And there isn't that sort of alignment. So it seems like, as we would say, kind of in recruitment parlay from my recruitment days, you are what we would call one of those unicorns, the people that understand enough about the tech, are a tech kind of practitioner, but understand the business outcomes. And, you're not just thinking about the product, but you're thinking about the problem. And I think that's a very unique kind of skill set. So would love to then kind of come on to Promon and understand a little bit more about the business and specifically the problem you've chosen to kind of focus your efforts on.
Yeah. So Promon's an interesting company. I'd never heard of Promon until a year and a bit ago. Um, you will have our software installed on your phone, almost certainly. In fact, all of the listeners today will probably have it on their phone. We're one of these silent companies, that sit there and deliver and protect the world without anyone knowing that we exist, which is a really cool place to be. It's also where my career started in infrastructure. If you do your job right, nobody cares. If you do it wrong, everybody cares, right? And that's kind of where we sit. So where we essentially sit is, if you think about most cybersecurity companies, what they are is that they are about protecting enterprises against insider threats or against threats from the outside to that company, mostly around corporate and enterprise IT. That's not what Promon does. We protect those same companies, but we also protect their consumers, their users, specifically in the mobile space, whilst we also expand outside of that as well. So we take the mobile app and we protect it in such a way that it makes it really hard for the bad actors of this world to tamper with it, to steal your intellectual property or to interact with your users in a malicious way. And that can help with, security problems. It can help you understand and develop your apps in a more efficient and effective way to provide better user experience for your customers. Or it can help, more importantly these days, with preventing fraud and risks to your apps. And we exist across 2.5 billion apps today around the world. So we're everywhere. And it's a really interesting place to be.
That's awesome. And keen to sort of understand the kind of the thinking, the rationale behind, everyone, as you mentioned, is sort of securing those enterprises. You've decided to secure the devices themselves or the users themselves. Talk me through that kind of like thinking and what the obstacles you kind of overcame, because inevitably, if it was like obvious and easy, other people probably would have done it. So if you can kind of expand on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. This Promon started 20 years ago with the founder. His name's Tom. And at the time, it was about buffer overflow attacks back in desktop software. And over time, we realized, or Tom and the team realized, that actually that wasn't really what our architecture was designed for. When we moved into the mobile era, let's call it that, where organizations were starting to put their intellectual property into mobile apps to give to you and I in untrusted spaces where we didn't know how the customer was likely to be using that app. If it was an untrusted device, whether it was a malicious actor, for example, trying to tamper with it, that's where our architecture really shone. And that's where we've gone. And the whole industry is kind of doing this. We talk about things like zero trust for the last 10 years now. It's essentially the same thing, right? Putting guardrails up, making sure that you protect and do least privilege and all of these good things. And you do it right at the edge, no longer with that kind of boundary, that firewall boundary that we used to talk about in infrastructure many, many years ago. We do it at the very edge. And there's always a layered approach. But in this case, we're talking about moving away from that traditional web architecture, where you can take all of your business logic, all of your sensitive stuff, and put it behind web application firewalls and host it in your own data centers or in the cloud where you have full control over it. It's now a world where, particularly with AI and expectations of consumers, apps need to act much quicker than that. They can no longer afford to be sending everything back to the cloud. There's lots of good reasons, including data sovereignty for that as well, and privacy. So now the logic that we used to hide in our data centers can no longer be hidden in our data centers. We have to put it and embed it into apps and put it in the hands of you and I and other people that maybe are doing malicious things with that. So that's kind of the transition that we've gone through. Lots of industries have done that as well, but it's a growing industry. If you look at just the Gartner hype curve, for example, we've kind of gone up, we've gone down, and we're up on the curve coming up now. So more and more organizations are starting to look at companies like Promon and what we do. And clearly a big driver for that, particularly in Europe, is compliance.
You gave us a bit of a teaser there. Talk to us a bit more kind of on the compliance front of what these real kind of challenges or changes are.
There's a lot. And what we're seeing is a different split in regions. So if we just take EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, that is compliance heavy. And that's where the majority of our business comes from, actually, because we started with compliance. And you know this better than others, but or better than me. But with compliance, it's not a carrot, it's a stick, right? You must meet these particular compliance criteria. And we're seeing more and more of this regulation come out in Europe, particularly with things like PSD3, the AI Act, and there are many, many others in this space as well, including here in the UK. All of these are driving companies to put more and more controls and monitoring in place. If we take a look at Asia and the Middle East, we're starting to see something very similar there as well. India is a really good example of this. They've gone quite heavy with regulation over there, but the regulation in the Middle East and Asia is different to the regulation that we see here in Europe. In Europe, it tends to be more outcome based. We want you to detect and block these types of activities and these outcomes for malicious actors. In Asia, it tends to be more, these are the very specific things we want you to block. And obviously, technology moves on very quickly. And therefore, that legislation and regulation becomes quite difficult to maintain and keep up with that. And then if we look across the pond over to the US, it's a very different market again. The focus is so different over there. Even just the financial services institutions over there, they're not heavily regulated in the same way that they are in Europe, but there is a clear drive and a passion, I would say, to protect intellectual property. And we see that play out in the media as well, don't we? So a lot of our customers are financial services, but we also protect the gaming industry and kind of like the gig industry, delivery industry, and all of them have intellectual property that they want to protect from being stolen from for various players around the world.
I would love you to kind of talk and develop that a little bit more and talk about some of the benefits of living and kind of operating in an area that is having to be adherent to higher kind of regulatory scrutiny.
Yeah, there's several points there. So let's just go back to sovereignty for a second. There are two parts to the sovereignty position here. There's data sovereignty, which national board is your data held within, and then there's cloud or data center sovereignty. Physically, where are your data centers and who are they run by? Are they run by the US tech giants, for example? And what we're starting to see, particularly in Europe, is cloud sovereignty becoming very important. If we take a look at France and Italy and a whole bunch of other nations close to us, you will find that a lot of them are looking at hosting their own infrastructure. Now, the problem we've got with that is, of course, the US tech giants have had a lot of money, a lot of time. So what we're starting to see is fragmentation. We're starting to see the US tech giants offer their services a little bit like how McDonald's works, if I can use that franchise analogy for a second, where they're essentially providing their technology to the locals and they can host it within reason, and it's run by the nationals of that country, which is great from a cloud sovereignty perspective. Then if we look at a lot of the regulation, that starts to focus on data sovereignty. Where is the data held? And there's some regulation. Let's just take a look at Italy again as an example. There's some regulation in Italy later this year that if you're an Italian citizen living in Italy and you and your data is related to a public sector service, then your data must not leave the Italian borders. So it must be stored there, must be processed there. And that's interesting if you think about mobile for a second, because you could now be traveling anywhere in the world. Imagine you're traveling here to the UK and you're an Italian citizen. Your data cannot be processed in the UK. It must be processed in Italy and stored and remained in Italy. Now, if you think about this from a multinational organization that's trying to protect all of their data, and you may have customers in Italy, you may have customers in the UK, you may have customers in the Middle East, and now you need a view across all of your data. That data must remain in Italy, and maybe you've got other data in the UAE that must remain in the UAE. That's a difficult technology problem to solve, let alone a data compliance issue to solve. It's a fun place to be at the moment.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think without going too much into kind of the political and economic realms, it's very interesting how being in a heavily kind of regulated country such as ours, presumably that means that there's so many more parts of the world and so many more players you can potentially kind of work with, because presumably even the kind of the banks out in the US who might not have to be adherent to those same things, presumably if they're operating internationally, like Italy, for example, they're going to need solutions such as yours in those key locations where they maybe can't meet the requirements themselves. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And I think you use the example of the UK being heavily regulated. The UK does not want to regulate. Nobody wants to regulate. The regulators do not want to regulate. It's the last lever that you can possibly pull if every other mechanism does not work. Right. So what I like about the system that we have in the UK is that regulation is the last lever that you pull, but more importantly, it is um, it is done in a way that guides and influences the industry only when needed. Unlike some other types of regulation that we see around the world, where it's really clearly defined exactly what the steps you need to take are, and so it's different in the UK, and I like that. What it means is that we have regulatory bodies here in the UK that care about the biggest risks, and they will try and influence that via other means, first of all, which is why we can do things like lobbying here in the UK. And then if that doesn't work, then regulation comes in. But that regulation is often short-lived.
The advantages of being in more regulated countries or areas and having to get kind of more strict to compliance, really, it's just you're building up a better catalog of kind of evidence to show you're trustworthy.
It is trust is everything. It encompasses everything, reputation, which is so important these days in maybe the social media era that we're in today. Um, so absolutely, we need to get this right. And I think legislation and regulation that was of course it's a driver now, but it was a driver that was maybe more elevated a few years ago. Now we're in a position where it's maybe not quite so important from that perspective, but we have a chief trust officer in a lot of organizations now, which is much more significant and encompasses things like cybersecurity and compliance all in one. Yeah.
Hmm. And staying on the topic of trust, and I think it really kind of then feeds into your role as well. Really interesting, as I said, you're a great kind of case study of maybe what needs to happen more across the cybersecurity space. So talk around, the importance of having a multi-hat wearer or a, unicorn sort of role in the business, such as you, that understands the tech, understands the capabilities, and in a non-salesy way can actually really kind of communicate the value and build trust.
Yeah. It's funny, David. I don't think of myself as a unicorn, but I'll take the compliment. I consider myself a translator. The fact that I understand these things, and maybe that does make people like me unicorns, but I have a lot of friends that are very similar to me. I think can do a great job. I think more people are good at this than they realize. They just haven't necessarily taken the step to kind of take ownership of that or enforce that, whatever it may be. So, yeah, I think it's important that you have people in organizations that are deep technical specialists or deep specialists in sales or marketing, whatever they may be, because they understand that world. But it's more important to have generalists that understand how that will likely affect other parts of the business. And ultimately, in business, we are there to serve our customers and our shareholders, right? That's where we are in this world today. So it's important that we understand what both of those communities require from us. And that these days, in the world of AI and social media and all of that stuff, like I say, is trust. Customers expect trust. And that means that when we say we are going to deliver something, we actually deliver something. And that's important because when we deliver something, that's not about us writing code and making it available to customers. In all honesty, is the easier part. I know there's a lot of complication and difficulty that goes behind it, blood, sweat, and tears, and all of that. But marketing it, positioning it well in the market, making sure that our shareholders are happy, making sure that our customers understand how it can benefit them. It's not just a bit of technology, it's something that will solve one of their actual real world business problems. And making sure that the sales team are aware of how to position that in the correct way. So they're not just selling tech, they are selling products, or more importantly, they are selling outcomes and solutions to customer problems. That's a really hard thing to get right. And I often consider myself as the spider that sits in the middle of the spider's web. My job is not to know all these things. All of the people around me are much smarter than me at what they do. I only hire people that are smarter than me. That's my deal, right? You find them people that know their world better than you possibly could, and then you use them as advisors. My job is to get the best out of them, put them in a position where they can thrive, but they understand that there are guardrails around them. There's support from myself and the other people. And I'm the translator that does the translation between all of these components.
So I'd love to stay with that a second, actually, kind of look beneath the hood and unpack your kind of role a little bit more, because I think, it's, I typically might have a chief product officer and a chief technology officer separate. You're obviously those two things kind of combined, but I think it would be interesting to understand what the day to day of your role actually looks like.
Yeah, it's a timely question. Yesterday, actually, we integrated our AI service with Office. Um, and I asked ChatGPT to tell me what my normal week looks like. And it did. It assessed the last month, my normal week. And it basically said, your profile is a good CPTO, which, there's a bit of bias in there, I think, as well. But when I went into it a little bit further, it described me as a connector. My job is a networker and a connector. My day is full of one-to-ones and team meetings and jumping into sprint reviews and then jumping into win-loss analysis deals with the commercial team. My job is to understand what is going on and slowly but surely influence various parts. That's my day-to-day job. And that's great. That's super important. And then I have another hat that I wear, and that is to be part of the leadership team, the executive leadership team. And I consider both of these things equal and important jobs. As part of my executive leadership team role, my role is not a technologist. My role is a leader of the company. And that means setting strategy, understanding what our shareholders expect from us, understanding what we're a private equity owned company, understanding what they expect from us, making sure that what we deliver is on brand and is going to meet with those expectations. And of course, that means creating strategies, making sure that they are delivered across the company. Everybody understands what their goals are, what their objectives are, how they're going to meet them, how we're going to deliver them, making sure the structures of the teams are in place. I've made a whole bunch of changes across our, not just engineering teams, but the whole organization to make sure that that can work effectively. So if I do my job right, I don't have a job at the end of it. And that's a success, in my opinion. It should be that I don't have to be that glue that holds everybody together. I put the relationships in place so that they can manage them themselves. And then I get less and less work to do, which is it's good for everyone.
Great, great, perfect. And the cybersecurity industry is obviously an incredibly competitive, tough market to be in. And just from, the work and the events, RSA and such forth that I've been to over in the US, you see some of the, vendors are kind of always out competing people on who can get the biggest booth, who can have the biggest stand, who can do the kind of the craziest thing and get the super truck or the limo. How do you essentially kind of shut out that noise and really focus and decide from a strategic perspective what's going to move the needle and what's going to sort of land and actually resonate with the people you want to speak with?
I've seen this from all angles. I worked for government for a number of years, and you don't really have that there. And I think that kind of grounding in delivering the right thing for the public, making sure that the public is safe and secure and has the right services available, that's what's taught me how to do this correctly. My version of correctly as well. It's everyone has their own version. Then I worked for a US company, and it's great. I got to experience what that's like. And it's a way of doing business, exactly as you described it a second ago. And it works for a lot of the world. What I like about Promon is that we're a Scandinavian company based in Norway. That's our headquarters. And whilst we have people dotted around the world from 35 nationalities, which is incredible, it's so good, it's taught me so much. The most important thing it's taught me is the importance of being grounded. And it brings back my experiences back in the public sector. For me, listening to customers and solving real world problems that they need today is more important than the big shiny billboards. We have a great marketing team. They're really good. But again, it's Scandinavian based. So it's real, it's grounded. I think that's so important. And I think that works really importantly or really well in Europe, more so than elsewhere. We've just expanded our marketing team into the US as well, because we recognize that what we do in marketing in Europe and the Middle East isn't working so well in the US, and we need to fix that. So we will have a different approach in different parts of the world.
Mm. Well, I think it's so interesting, that sort of challenge. I know certain businesses that are almost that kind of marketplace or that broker between US vendors who have been incredibly successful, hit huge kind of ARR numbers, but their messaging lands flat in the UK, and understand the particular kind of buyer persona is so vitally important.
Let's take that to Promon now. The reason we have so many people from so many different places is to understand our customers, understand what's important in different parts of the world. But more importantly for me, to build a norm of how people should work together, that we will face challenges. We will face, we face we face challenges every day where there's conflict between people because just their cultural norm is so different. If we just take the UK and France as two good examples again, there, the way we give feedback in the UK and the way we give feedback in France is so different. It's at different ends of the spectrum. But recognizing that and calling it out makes the whole workplace such a more powerful place to be. And it doesn't just put the onus on the person that's at one end of the spectrum to just take it, or at the other person to just deliver it in a different way and not be them. It makes everyone more tolerable, which is important. And if we take that back to how we deliver to market, it means that we can have the right conversations with the right customers in the right way. We can pull in people from different cultures and ask them questions about how to deliver a particular message. It's so powerful.
So what we've not spoken about, but I think the elephant in the room that we need to kind of come on to and address is AI. You've mentioned it and kind of touched on it a couple of times. You mentioned this new kind of product that's coming out as well. So let's talk around, first of all, how you're kind of using AI in the business and maybe talk about this new launch that's come out.
Yeah, there's so many aspects to AI, but let's just take the obvious one first of all. In security, there are AI threats these days. And maybe they're not well known, but they're certainly accelerating. And maybe they're not end-to-end enabled with AI yet, but that's just a matter of time. If we just take a look at what the NCSC have recently published, by the end of 2027, which is not that far away now, they believe that there will be an end-to-end, entirely agent-based AI attack that is prominent. That's not far away. So we need to protect as much as we can against those threats, particularly with agentic AI. And that's what we do, right? That's what we've done for years before we called it AI, and we'll continue to do that. And we have a fantastic security research team, world class, that deliver that every day. So that's one thing. But that's BAU for us. And it sounds pretty cool, but it is just BAU. And then, of course, we need to keep up with these threats as well. So we, of course, use AI in the development of our capabilities in a safe and secure and guardrailed way, just like most other companies do these days. So, for example, we do write our own code. We don't entirely vibe code everything, but we use AI to enable that and to speed it up and code review. We treat AI a little bit like having a team of other engineers around you. You would never trust one engineer to deliver something end to end. So why would you trust an AI to do that? But maybe you can trust another AI to help you guide what the other AI is doing, right? So that type of stuff. And then the third bit is how we deliver products to the market. Because if we're honest about it, the market and AI these days is a bit of a buzzword, if I can say that. Companies, one of the things we learned recently is if we put AI in our marketing, we get 30 or 40%, I can't remember the exact number, more direct queries from potential prospects just for having AI in the marketing, which is insane. I don't want to put AI everywhere. So for me, it's about using the right technology for the right thing. AI is an enabler to achieve an outcome. I would rather talk about the outcome and say it's enabled by AI. And that's exactly what we do in our products. So our products do have AI in them. We use AI to build our products, and we have it AI enabled for our customers so they can ask us questions in a way that makes sense. And then finally, let's just touch on agentic AI for a moment, because when we talk AI, we typically are thinking, ChatGPT and a whole bunch of the other LLMs that are out there and that are being embedded into other tools. And that's great, but you don't need another one of them, in my opinion. There are enough of them out there. What you probably need is to protect the ones that you have, the ones that you're installing at crazy speed at the moment. And that's where Promon sits. Rather than building another agentic AI capability or MCP capability, what we will do is protect your existing investments that you have elsewhere to make sure that they are protected in exactly the same way that all of your apps have been protected for the last however many years before AI was even a thing.
So talk about kind of what Promon does then in that sense of how you kind of offer that runtime capability, the security for agentic AI.
Yeah. So we look at behavioral analytics. So we look at how the AI is acting, what looks normal. And because we have it at huge scale at 2.5 billion devices around the world, we can look at what looks normal for you today versus what looks normal for your peers over the last however long. A good example of that may be if, for example, the way we used to protect apps is we would look and apply a profile to an app. So that profile would be like, if your device is rooted, or if we detect this very specific thing happening, then we terminate the app or don't allow that payment to happen, or whatever it may be. That was great. But there's a difference with you installing the app on your phone right now and logging in for the first time versus me, who's had the app on my phone for the last year, and I've been a banking customer for the last 20 years. There's a difference in profiles there. And AI is enabling us to group things and cluster things in a way that is much more achievable and understandable by humans. And that's exactly what we apply to our products today. So it enables us to be much more granular, much more precise, without necessarily having swarms of data scientists. Of course, we have data scientists to help with this as well, but we can do it at a much larger scale and commercialize it much easier.
As we're kind of looking ahead and, we touched on agentic AI, what are the kind of the biggest changes you see, whether it's in the regulatory and the compliance side of things, that offer maybe opportunities for you as a business?
Such a good question. I think more and more companies are moving to outcome-based requirements. They don't want, this is a tool consolidation play, right? They don't want to go to a vendor and say, please give me RASP, and another vendor saying, please give me this very specific thing. What they're saying is, we have this problem, help us solve it. And that means that we're starting to see plays in the market where companies are acquiring other companies, for example, so they can extend their portfolio, or more importantly, what we're seeing in Europe is partnerships, where vendors can work together to solve a particular problem for a customer. That, I think, is going to change the industry significantly. And it already has, just in the last few years. We're going to start seeing, I think, customers reducing the number of vendors that they want to work with, and those vendors becoming much more strategic players, more of a partner. I know we use the word partner to mean a lot of things, but I mean a true partner, where you can solve things together rather than a transactional vendor.
So this consolidation thing makes a lot of sense. But then as a consequence of that, if there's more consolidation going on and more partnerships being had, that then leaves a lot of these salespeople, all of a sudden, they're not necessarily needed. And it gives rise, really, or added importance to people such as yourself, those field CISOs, CTOs, whatever, technical and kind of product evangelists who can talk to the technical requirements, can talk to the outcomes, but also understand the kind of commercials behind it. Is that something you see sort of playing out over the next few years, that I guess the lessening importance of sales-led motions?
But it's not just in sales. We see the same thing with engineering and how AI is impacting their duties, their life as
Mm.
well. So in sales, what we're starting to see is customers not wanting, well, so many more direct queries, people coming to us because we're starting to position things in a more of a solution style way. But salespeople aren't going away. That's a good thing. It just means that their role is going to change. They're no longer going to be talking about selling features and functions. They're going to spend much of their time with many fewer clients, understanding what their actual needs are. We've seen this in the last few years. If we just look at the kind of the drive from typical RSMs and AEs to much more of a annual recurring revenue, where we started introducing things like customer success managers, for example, and TAMs, all of these are kind of coming together. I think it's really hard now to divide up the typical salesperson, the point in time sale, versus the recurring revenue, keeping customers happy, versus the technologist, the SE or the TAM kind of responsibility. I think it's really hard to split them up. And we've tried over the last few years, haven't we, of looking at how we can incentivize salespeople in different ways to get them to focus on different things. Actually, I think what we're likely to see over the next few years is a consolidation of all of that. So if you're just an RSM or an AE today, understanding the technology is going to be more and more important. Understanding the customer's environment, the regulation is going to be even more important. Understanding the different personas in there is going to be even more important. So concepts like MedPick, they're great at this type of stuff, but it's bigger than that now, much bigger.
Hmm. Can I applaud you, first of all? I mean, you did such a fantastic job there of not sounding like AI. As soon as you said the sales role isn't vanishing, I thought, I was like, he's going to say it's evolving. And I was like, you managed to not fall into that trap. It's so hard, isn't it? Kudos to you for not falling into that trap. But I think it's such an interesting space, and I've never been like when I had my kind of recruitment hat on, and I was sort of speaking to people, and they're like doing all these podcasts, and even seemingly speak at a relatively kind of technical level, understanding the problem. People say, "Why don't you come and go into cybersecurity?" I'm never technical enough to do that, but I understand the problem, and I like that.
Over my career, particularly in recent years, I have told so many people that tell me that they are not technical, that they are wrong. And I don't tell many people that they are wrong often, but that's one thing that I do, because it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking, I'm not good enough at this. And that's just not the case, because we don't need replicas of people that we have today. We need a different breed of people, a different breed of salespeople, different breed of engineers. So if you're kind of assessing yourself against the people that have done this job for the last 20 years, then of course you're going to fail. That's not right. You need to be thinking about what you need in the future, what the world needs in the future, and it's not the same people. So the
The
fact
role's
that you can,
evolving.
the world's evolving, yes. Yeah, I need to stop talking now.
I said it, not you. What are the general trends you're sort of seeing? Because the AI space is evolving so quickly, the attack surface of the kind of the AI threats are, but also the capabilities of AI for good are evolving. What are the trends you're paying attention to that you're kind of most excited about?
Yeah, good question. So the problem is there are so many of these trends now. And I
Mm.
think an important part of, we're talking about roles evolving, right? An important part of any role, if we just go back to the sales role for a second, is understanding the environment that the customer is operating in. The same thing applies here in cybersecurity, right? It's understanding what the cybersecurity threats are, what the technology is doing. And I mean, just in the last few days, we've seen Claude security launch and a significant impact to the US stock market. And that plays a big part in this, right? And we're going to see more and more of this because that was a bit of a surprise to a lot of the industry. So I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that. What are the trends? I could pick out one or two, but I don't think I'm going to do that because they will be wrong tomorrow. What I think it's important to say is keeping up with the news, and not just mainstream news, but the technology news, the commercial world, is what I spend so much of my time doing. And that may be keeping up with things like AI, but it can also be using AI to help you keep up with those trends. So here's an example of what I do every morning. I get Google AI to write me or produce me a podcast for 2 minutes of what's happened over the last 24 hours. And that's what I listen to in the shower every morning. Right, it sounds really boring, but it helps me off. Yeah, it helps me get on top of what's happened over the last 24 hours. So when I have the conversations with customers later on in the day, I'm at least abreast of what's happened. There are technology trends and there are business trends. Let's just touch on a couple of technology ones for a second. And some of these will be buzzwords, but let's just talk post-quantum for a second, because I'm sure a lot of listeners will care about that. And that is a trend that we've been hearing for the last few years, and you're starting to see vendors jump on this. You're starting to see a whole bunch of vendors with quantum in their name, for example. And my advice to everybody in this space would be to understand your risk. There's no change. Quantum will become a thing at a certain point. We still don't know exactly when that will be, in the next 10 to 15 years, maybe. But you need to understand your risk today. So if you are a vendor like Promon, then it's probably not so important to you, but it may be important to your customers. So understand what that relationship is. Whereas if you are a banking customer or a government trying to protect data for a long period of time, then this is a problem that you should have tackled already. So it's not about, and I see this with technology all the time. It's not about thinking that this technology is useful or not useful or relevant or not relevant. It's all dependent on your current situation. And then let's talk business stuff for a second. I think the rise of digital media that we've seen over the last few years is super important. It's the way that people buy and learn things these days. Phrases like doom scrolling on social media are becoming important for businesses to understand how they can land messages with influencers, so that when they come and do their technology choice, they've at least heard of a vendor. I think there's going to be so much in this space around privacy. And I think this market is going to explode and then implode over the next few years. I hope I'm wrong, but there's so much risk in this space of influencing people in a very private space.